During one summer break from college, I decided to offer my spare room as an Airbnb. It seemed like a great way to earn some extra cash at the time. Everything was going well until I received a booking request from a guy named Raphael. His profile seemed normal enough, so I accepted the reservation. He arrived late into the night. He looked quite different from his profile picture, which was quite shocking. The man before me had a ragged appearance, his jacket muddy, his face full of scars, and clearly one too many tattoos than necessary. I thought nothing of it as everyone has their preferences. But I do remember thinking that there was something unsettling about him. I showed him around the house and then his room. He turned to me and asked which room was mine. For some reason, he seemed more interested in that than looking at his own. I got a very bad gut feeling, but decided to think that he was just asking in case he needed something. I told him my room was just down the corridor and he smiled a peculiar smile at me. It was unnerving, but he was here now and I didn't want to put myself in any danger by doing anything to offend him as he was twice my size. I smiled back and told him that I would be heading to bed as I had work early in the morning. I went to my room and immediately locked the door. Offering Airbnb to random strangers seemed like a good idea at the time. My room is a long one and has a sliding door to the patio on its far end. I usually keep the curtains open so that I can see my plants with the screen door closed. Despite my uneasy feelings, I somehow managed to fall asleep that night. The next morning, I unlocked my door cautiously and went outside. I guessed that my guest Raphael was still asleep since there was no one in the living room. He came out in a bit and after exchanging pleasantries, told me that he was in town for some business and would only be here later in the night. I felt very stupid at my reaction from the previous evening. Despite his appearance, he was clearly harmless. I went about my day. After work, I did some groceries then came back home. There was no sign of the guy. I finished doing my laundry and some housework. I usually pick out a movie before bed if I'm not too busy. I found a good documentary on Netflix and began to watch. In the midst of the documentary, my guest returned and wordlessly settled on the sofa beside me without any invitation. It was weird, but I decided not to let my thoughts wander and told myself this is how just some people are. I offered him popcorn and he ate some without a word. I tried to make some small talk as an attempt to start a conversation, but he didn't seem interested and only gave dry replies. After the movie ended, I bid him good night and went to my room. I was so tired that I almost immediately fell asleep. It must have been very late when I woke up feeling really thirsty. As I reached for the water bottle that I kept at my bedside, I had the sudden jitters of being watched. Instantly, my eyes wandered to the sliding door, and sure enough, there was a dark figure standing there, watching me. I couldn't make out his face due to the dark, but I completely froze. As if sensing my eyes on him, he slowly walked away from the door. My heart was thumping really loud and I was sweating like crazy. I immediately hopped out of bed and ran to the sliding door. After making sure it was locked, I drew the curtains. I almost jumped the very next instant when there was a sharp knock on my door. I held my breath as the guy continued to knock. Then he tried the doorknob, trying to get inside the room. Thankfully, I had locked it before I went to bed. His knocks were persistent and became louder until he was heavily pounding the door. I yelled at him, threatening to call the cops, and all went silent. I saw the shadow of his feet leaving the door. I dialed 911 before the guy returned or broke down my door. The cops arrived soon enough and searched the entire house. There was no sign of the guy or any evidence that he had been there. Upon showing his profile to the cops, I found out that the guy had a criminal record. I still shudder thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't locked my door that night. As a writer, I often like to escape the city and stay in quiet towns to finish my books, away from all the hustle and bustle. Last fall, I traveled to this suburban town called Riddles Creek for that very reason. For my stay, I booked an Airbnb online, as I usually did. From the looks of the posting, it promised a tranquil retreat with bed and breakfast, and on top of all that, it was very cheap. The next day, I left the city and took off for my retreat. When I got there, the owner of the Airbnb greeted me. He was a pleasant guy in his late 50s named John. We made small talk, and he told me that his son used to stay with him, but now that he had left for college, he decided to rent his room to Airbnb. John showed me my room. It was modestly furnished, but neat. John told me to call him if I needed anything else. I nodded and he left. I decided to call my mom and let her know that I had reached there safely. My mom has always been a bit paranoid and asked me where I was staying. I promised to send her the location. As I was talking to her, I walked into the bathroom and noticed how there wasn't a towel on the hook. I told my mom that I had to ask the owner for a towel and hung up. As soon as I walked out of the bathroom, I completely forgot about it and began unpacking my stuff. When I finished, I nestled into the bed, ready to work on my book. A few minutes in, I heard a knock on the door. I put my things away and went to answer it. It was John, and he was holding a towel. He apologized and told me that he had forgotten to hang it in the bathroom. It felt weird and off, especially considering that I had complained about it to my mom earlier, but I took it from him with a word of thanks. Once he left, I blamed my mom for the intrusive thoughts and forgot about it. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon and eggs. I immediately went to freshen up. After a shower, I went outside. The table was laid with breakfast and John was still cooking more. I told him everything looked delicious and took a seat. While I ate, I noticed he had an impressive collection of chef's knives displayed along his back wall, and I was convinced that he must have been one heck of chef. A few minutes later, he joined me and told me how much he missed having company, and I actually felt bad for the old guy, and then he asked a peculiar question that made me pause. "Did you finish your work last night?" I stopped chewing. I rummaged through my memory, any mention, anything that would confirm that I had told him about my work, but couldn't recall anything from our previous conversation. So how could he have known that I was working last night? I swallowed and casually asked him, "What work?" He paused and cautiously said, "Oh, just a hunch. A lot of people come out here to work." I faked a smile and nodded. But I didn't buy it. He sounded quite convinced when he asked the question. I hurriedly finished my breakfast and excused myself. As soon as I went to the room, I locked the door, my heart beating hard and fast. I didn't know if I was overthinking or if I had inherited my mother's paranoia, but one thing was certain. I wasn't letting this go. I scanned the room. I ran my hands across the smooth surfaces of the walls, feeling for any hidden devices. There were none. I checked beneath the lampshades, the clock, the television, and even the smoke detector on the ceiling. Nothing. Defeated, I sat back down on the bed. Perhaps I was overthinking. As the thoughts swirled through my mind, my eyes landed on a small plush kitten on one of the shelves facing the bed. A thought tugged at my gut. Didn't the owner say this room was his son's? It was quite weird for a guy to own a plush kitten like this. As I carefully examined it, I noticed how the left eye looked different from the right, like it had been sewn back on. I took out a razor from my toiletry bag and cut through the eye. Sure enough, behind the eye was a miniature camera. The blood drained from my face when I realized what was happening. He had been watching me this whole time, invading my privacy. I could hear the owner John in the kitchen, and what made it worse was that it sounded like he was sharpening his knives. I had to act fast. My hands trembled as I dialed 911 and explained everything. The 911 dispatcher told me to stay on the line and that help was on its way. Soon enough, the cops showed up at the door and the old man was arrested. Although I avoided any harm, it was the last time I booked an Airbnb. Last summer, my girlfriend and I decided to travel to Bali for our 2-year anniversary. To help save some money and make our trip economical, we decided to book an Airbnb instead of an expensive hotel room. We found a decent place in Kuta Utara, owned by a nice lady. She was very friendly and even had a meal prepared and set for us upon our arrival. There were odd relics and antique objects all over her place. I had heard that some local people here in the village were superstitious, so I thought nothing of it. The lady showed us to our room. It was small, but the sheets on the bed were clean, and the window provided us with a nice view. The woman said she had some chores to do, and left us to do our thing. As we unpacked, my girlfriend dropped her charger and crouched to pick it up. As she did so, she saw something under the bed and pulled it out. It looked like a carved wooden figurine with ratted hair that resembled a little girl. Then she found another one under the bed that looked like a male figurine, among other unexplainable objects. She freaked out and immediately told me that we couldn't stay here. I laughed and asked her if she really believed in this stuff. She was persistent on leaving, but I told her it was late and we wouldn't be able to find another reasonable accommodation so urgently. With some convincing, she agreed to stay the night. We spent the entire day sightseeing and were exhausted by the time we returned, so we hit the hay. It must have been somewhere around midnight when I woke up to a strange sound. It sounded like a woman humming. I looked at my girlfriend and was glad to see that she was still sleeping. She would have freaked. But what was that sound? Was it the old lady praying or something? The sound grew louder, and there were multiple hums now. My girlfriend woke up as well and clung to me, afraid for her life. The voices sounded demonic. It almost felt as if they were coming from under our bed. All right, now I regretted not listening to her suggestion about leaving this place. The very next instant, painful howls pierced the air. It sounded as if something or someone were in unbearable pain. Unable to stand it any longer, I got out of bed, ready to check it out. But my girlfriend stopped me and wouldn't let me go. She said we were going to leave this place the next morning anyway. She made sense, so I stayed. After a few minutes, the sounds died, but we couldn't sleep a wink that night. The next day, as we ate breakfast in silence, I casually mentioned to the woman that I heard her praying last night. She looked alarmed and asked us if we believed in the spiritual realm, and my girlfriend told her that she went to church every Sunday. Upon hearing that, the old lady let out a guttural laugh and told us how whatever God we believed in and prayed to would be no help to us here. I saw my girlfriend's face growing very pale, which told me that she knew something that I didn't. But I wasn't left wondering for long. The old lady revealed to us that she was the local shaman, or dukuan as it was called in the local dialect of Bali. She had a deep connection to the local spirits and needed to keep them happy, or else they would bring famine and disease to the village. Later, when the lady left the house to run an errand, we started to pack our belongings as none of us wanted to stay in this weird house a moment longer. But before we left, I suggested that we take a look around and find the source of the sounds from last night. My girlfriend was hesitant, but I convinced her that someone might need our help. Upon searching, we chanced upon a door that led to the basement, which was weird because the Airbnb didn't mention one. Clearly the old lady didn't want anyone down there. We went down the stairs and were shocked to see that there were strange symbols carved on the ground. In the middle, we found some bones and the carcasses of dead animals, along with a rotting smell in the air. Clearly someone or something had died here. But the most disturbing thing was the fact that the place was surrounded by carved wooden statues that resembled humans, possibly past Airbnb guests. I turned to my girlfriend and said, "Let's get the heck out of here." We grabbed our stuff and left the strange house. To this day, I keep wondering what kind of cult the woman belonged to. What could have happened to us if we stayed there? And each time, I am glad we didn't wait to find out.